Hello, good evening, and welcome. You're joining us for the live transmission of the Oxford City Council Planning Committee, because today is a very, very special day. It's D-Day, maybe, for the Jericho Boatyard Canal side. The City Council Planning Committee is about to meet to decide whether to approve the latest plans. Meanwhile, let's have a bit of history. It's been close to 2 decades since the last boaters were evicted by force, and 30 years since it was a working boatyard. Today, the site is derelict and a pile of mud and old buildings, hidden by hoardings. Here it is from the air. It's very, very sad. This is probably the biggest development site in central Oxford. No people, no boats, just dereliction and a wild animal sanctuary. The beauty of the Italian parish church St Barnabas obscured by detritus. It's a wasteland. But let's have a bit of history. Let's go back to the eviction day in 2006.
I had about 6 police officers knock on the boat to try and wake me up. I came out and they gave me to 6:30 to
I'll get changed. I'll put my
move all my property off the bank. Gave me to 7 o'clock to move my boat off there and remoor over this side, all the way to arrest us. So there's about 4 or 5 of us, grabbed all our gear, hold it on boats, but I used other boats here to put gear on as well. Because the likelihood of us getting arrested we didn't want.
What happened was that I was walking down the street and I saw one of these extremely large cranes coming down the street, and as he stopped I spoke to the driver and asked him if he was coming down to the boatyard. He lied to me and told me that he had nothing to do with the boatyard, but I had an idea that he was coming down here. So I followed him down, and due to the size of his vehicle he was driving quite slowly, and as he came to turn into the boatyard, I jumped in front of the vehicle, got the D-lock out and tried to lock onto his brake lines, but unfortunately 3 coppers pounced on me as soon as I tried it and got me away before I managed to lock on. Which fortunately means that I haven't been arrested, but unfortunately means that I didn't manage to slow down the process that's going on here at the moment.
how do you feel about losing your home? How do I feel about it? Just accepting. Just from the minute they turned up, it was just that we were lucky to get anything out really at all. Any of our, like, got the kids' books, and that's the most important thing really. The kids are happy. They've got their books and some of their toys, and that was the main thing, you know.
So, might this be the future for the boatyard? Here are the plans up for discussion today. 18 posh and very expensive houses. Now they're necessary to generate revenue for the rest of the scheme. That's the way capitalism works. St Barnabas Church will be revealed in all its glory to those on both sides of the canal. There'll also be a ramp up to it. The jewel will be back in the Jericho Canal side crown firmly. In front of that, a piazza for community events, though not at the size the JWT wanted. The planners rejected their arguments. Besides that, the community facility is part financed by a developer as part of his claimed £7.2 million community contribution. A new boatyard with 3 docks, 1 wet and 2 dry, plus overnight facilities. Above that, a new 4,500 square foot community centre with an inbuilt cafe. Both of these will be built to shell by a developer. The Jericho Wharf Trust and the Community Association then tasked to find over £1 million to finish them off. And that's not an easy task. There's no bridge across the canal anymore. That's been kiboshed by the Canal and River Trust on safety grounds. The Mount Place Bridge will be replaced. Developers put in £655,000 towards that. There will be no social housing in the old community centre. The sums don't add up for that, and the planners agree with that. It's not a perfect scheme by a long way, but it uses a small patch of land in an economical and perhaps imaginative way. Remember, this is the 4th attempt by a series of developers to make canal side work. City Council's top planners have examined the scheme inside out and upside down. They put it to external consultants as well. Their conclusion is that it should get the green light firmly. Their report is robust on this. Now it's down to the politicians on the planning committee, who are just about to meet in the long room of the town hall. This current utopia may not be the one wished for by the JWT, but like all utopias, it maybe is out of reach. Join us after the meeting for post-match analysis. We'll bring you the meeting unvarnished and live. Over to the chairman. Okay, we're waiting for the Oxford City Council live stream to come on. It's a very, very important day for the Jericho Boatyard. There are 11 councillors, some of them from Jericho. The Jericho councillors are by and large recluse themselves from this meeting, as has the chairman. So the council have the report from their planners. They have to consider that, and then councillors speak, and so do members of the public. And I understand there are probably going to be 4 members of the public speaking, and they get 5 minutes maximum between them. And there will also be the developer putting his point of view. So stick with it, because we think this meeting is going to last probably an hour and a half. And after that, there will be a bit of analysis from us as to what happens to the decision, which could be very finely tuned. There's been very active debate in Jericho about this, and throughout the last few weeks, and indeed for the last 17 years. Here we are. Here's the City Council. Over to them.
Oxford Preservation Trust and a member of the Oxford Civic Society. But I've not taken, both of which organisations will have commented on applications received before us this evening, but I've taken no part in any conversations within those organisations about the applications before us this evening. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also a member of the Civic Society and of OPT and a trustee of OPT, both of whom have commented on various applications this evening, but I've taken no part in those and come to this meeting with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Diggins.
This isn't a declaration of interest, but I'll be recusing myself for the first application we're seeing because I predetermined it and I will be speaking.
That's fine. Sally.
As that item that Councillor Diggins refers to is connected to the subsequent one, I assume you'll recuse yourself from both because I think they're going to be taken together. Yeah.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I'm also a member of the Oxford Civic Society, but I've not taken part in any deliberations about any of these applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further declarations of interest? We appear to have the minutes on pages 13 to 22 from the last meeting, and I will take accuracy and matters arising together. Page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, page 17, page 18, page 19, page 20, and page 21. I think we can accept those as a true record on that basis. And then we move on to agenda item 4, land at Jericho Canal Side and Community Centre. Who would like to kick us off? Felicity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? I'll just take you through the site photos. The application site outlined in red. It is a constrained site, a very unusual shape, and has various different land ownerships on it. It's bounded to the west by the Oxford Canal, to the east by St Barnabas Grade 1 listed church and the residential area, St Barnabas Street, Canal Street and Coombe, and then to the north you have the City Council garages at Dawson Place. Then you have the rest of Canal Street and Coombe Road around to the north of the site. And then to the north of east along the canal is College Cruises, that's owned by the Canal and River Trust. And then to the south of the site, you have Worcester College and the green, their listed parks and gardens. A view of the site looking from the sort of southern western end on the canal towpath. The site has been vacant, as many of you will know, for a considerable time now. And in the distance, middle distance there, you can see St Barnabas Church. To the middle of the site, looking towards St Barnabas Street and the church to the left-hand side. Again, the church with the current dock, wet dock there, partly owned by the, part of it is owned by, the water is owned by the Canal and River Trust, and part of the land to the side. And looking down then towards the north of the site, and the tarpaulin is, as you can see, where College Cruises site is at the moment. They are currently using part of the north of the site here, as you can see in front of you in this picture, with the cars parked in that area, and some buildings, ancillary buildings. The pitched roof building, which hopefully you can see with my mouse, is part of theirs. And then they, the Canal and River Trust, the delineation is on the edge of Coombe Road, the building there on the left-hand side of that picture. I should also point out that the Canal and River Trust own the canal and also own ½ metre of the land that runs all the way down the edge of the canal itself. Just looking then back towards the southern end of the site, and in the distance you can see some of the residential properties there. Dawson Place, the City Council owned garage sites. There's right of access over there to the properties at the back, where you can see the cars are parked currently. The view from Canal Street, two large and very nice mature trees that offer some public amenity, which would be retained. St Barnabas Church. The view from Great Clarendon Street down towards the site, which is at the bottom there. And then from St Barnabas Street, looking back towards the church, an existing ash tree there. And to the left of that picture are the existing gates, which you can now see in this photograph, the existing pier and gates into the site itself. The building to the left of that picture is the vicarage, and the area to the right is the parking area associated with the church, which you can see in that photograph there on a sunnier day. So views from within the site, as you can see, it's derelict, a lot of hard standing, self-set seedlings. So this is taken from the southern end of the site, looking all the way north. and looking back towards the top end of the site, towards Worcester College. On the left, the taller building at the back there is student accommodation, and the smaller residential property is the end of 59 Canal Street, Great Clarendon Street, rather, sorry. To the left, then showing the residential property on the left-hand side, 13A St Barnabas Street, which was formerly an outbuilding and has been converted to a residential property there. And another view of that property. Looking towards the end, it's sort of the middle section of this part of the site with the dilapidated existing buildings on site, St Barnabas Church, and again, a view of the rear of St Barnabas Church and the buildings. To the right-hand side of that picture, you can see existing tree, which is adjacent to the vicarage. And this is a picture of the rear of the vicarage there, again, with the existing building to the right-hand side. Now into the northern end of the site, as you can see, currently used for parking, used by college cruisers for work on the boats that are lifted out of the water and alongside the quay. And again, round, and again, their sort of ancillary buildings and structures that they are currently using on the site. Again, more of their buildings looking towards number 9 Coombe Road and the boundary with that property. Moving then on to the proposed plans. The site and layout is very similar to that previously approved on the site, which was set out in the committee report. To the southern end of the site in orange in this picture is the residential part of the development in a terraced houses with the detached residential property right at the southern end adjacent to Worcester College and the student accommodation building at the end. Moving to the centre, there would be a new public open space to the rear of St Barnabas Church, a new basin associated with the new boatyard, which is depicted in dark red in this slide, and the solid red is the new community centre provision. This just shows some of the modelling, computer generated modelling, to give councillors an idea of the actual scale and massing of what is proposed. This is very similar in siting and height, massing and location to buildings previously approved in 2016 under the previous application. A CGI view of the proposed residential, which sits around the southern end of the site towards and along the canal frontage. And to the north, a view of the piazza, as we're calling it, public open space with seating, some new trees, and the combined boatyard building on the lower level with the upper stories in this image, which is the large multi-sports hall, which is part of the new community centre, which sits partly over the top of the boatyard and then to the right-hand side of the boatyard element. And taking just through some of the drawings, fronting, the top slide shows the frontage to the canal, and the bottom slide shows the rear of the residential properties, which would back on to Canal Street, St Barnabas Street properties. To the right-hand side is, on the upper slide, is the side elevation of a new residential, the separate detached dwelling, and on the ground, on the lower slide elevation, is the community centre boatyard building. And the above, this next elevation shows St Barnabas Street and Canal Street, which shows the new part of the development which would sit adjacent to the existing vicarage. And again, to the right-hand side, the elevation from Canal Street, which would sit behind those two large trees I mentioned in the photograph earlier, and the community centre. And the lower slide shows the full elevation of the Boatyard and Community Combined Centre building. As you can see, it's been designed into 3 separate elements. And again, the above this elevation at the top shows the elevation fronting the canal, the piazza and canal. And again, the difference to the lower one is that it also includes number 33 Canal Street, which is the existing community centre. And looking at this next slide shows the proposed new building adjacent to the vicarage more clearly, and how the residential terraced housing behind St Barnabas Street properties would sit within that, and the side elevation of the detached dwelling at the end of Great Clarendon Street. The middle slide shows, middle slide shows the rear of the community boatyard building, and how the eaves and ridge heights and the heights have been varied to mitigate impact on residents living on Coombe and Canal Street. And the lower elevation shows part of the side elevation from Great Clarendon Street, where it joins number 59 Canal Street, and the access into the underground Undercroft car parking for the residential there. And the next slide shows sections through the site, which I won't linger on at this point in time. Just some detailing to really highlight what is envisaged for the combined community centre and boatyard building. As I said before, this is being designed in separate elements to really show the different uses that would go on within that building. Boatyard, multi-sports hall above with veranda to enable them to use it for different events. The middle section, cafe with views over the piazza to the canal, and then the right-hand section contains the preschool in the lower floor with office and meeting rooms above for the community centre. And an elevation detailing the canal elevation, basically, of that boatyard, and how the architects have designed in architectural detailing to break down the scale and massing of that building along the Canal Street and its relationship to St Barnabas Church. Just some more detailing. Here you see some detailing of the wharf, residential wharf type buildings on the right hand side, where the architects have used industrial buildings to inform their design, and then more typical residential scale and form that represents and reflects the residential area surrounding. And here we see some details of the floor plans at the ground floor, first floor, second floor, and one of the residential properties has a third floor. Roof plan. This plan just shows a detailing of the community centre boatyard building, and here we see a delineation between phase 1 and phase 2 of that building. The applicant is proposing to build to phase 1, which is to the left hand side, if you can see my mouse moving around there, and the phase 2 would be by the community group who are hoping to own and manage that side of the community centre and the whole community centre as a whole. And just showing more floor plans and the roof plan of that. The proposed basin in front of the boatyard, which would hold the boats waiting to go in and come out of the boatyard, with a chain and buoy barrier to retain those boats within that yard, and so prevent any harm to traffic, boat traffic along the canal. And boatyard mitigation, flood mitigation points, which is set out in the committee report, and I will come to in a minute. Detail plan showing the proposed ramp, which would attach to the back of St Barnabas Church. It would be a combined ramp and seating, and would tuck into the upper levels to the rear doors of St Barnabas Church. These are original but have never been used because of the existing high stone wall that was constructed, which separates the church from the original boatyard. This wall would be demolished in order to facilitate this ramp and also the whole development. And an indicative landscape planting plan. This plan shows cycle parking provision, which I can come to later. So, Chair, I have a few updates on the report that I have, that is in the committee report. I apologise for typos. I did slip a pizza in instead of piazza, so I'm sorry about that. I did think I caught them all. Paragraphs 10.73 and 10.79, I have said it has auto-corrected to comprise instead of compromise. In the planning history, the full application has omitted some of the planning history, which is relevant. The history which is set out in the listed building report applies to the full application in this case, but both planning histories miss out a previous approval in 2009. There's an outline for a community centre granted in 2010, and this is that outline was for a building in the same location as the proposed boatyard and community centre that you see before you now. So apologies for that. Some other clarifications. The Highways Authority has removed their objection, which was based around the provision of 3 substandard car parking spaces. Amended plans have been submitted, which are before you, which shows those spaces lost, and one is now in its place, which is now tucked into the actual undercroft parking. So they've removed their objection on that basis. In terms of protected sea species, there are bats on site, protected species, but particularly in relation to these, I should have mentioned that we must have regard as a planning authority to the likelihood of a natural England licence being granted, and there are 3 tests under Regulation 53 of the 2017 regulations, which are 3 tests are imperative reasons of overriding public interest, no satisfactory alternative, and 3 favourable conservation status. In respect to the first, the site is allocated in the local plan 2036 for redevelopment, and there are overriding public benefits for bringing this vacant site into use. A new public open space, access to the canal, the boatyard, which will provide community DIY use, and also the community centre itself. And in this case, we consider there are overriding reasons of public interest. In respect of alternatives, these benefits derived from this are solely derived from developing this site alone for the specific uses and development. And further, this is an allocated site in the development plan again. And 3, it is considered that given the relatively low conservation value of the bat roosts found, their loss is unlikely to be considered significant, and the mitigation proposed is satisfactory. Overall, having regard to our duty and Regulation 53 of the Habitat and Species Regulation, we do consider there's imperative reasons of overriding interest, no satisfactory alternative sites that would deliver that interest, and it provides a favourable conservation status. As such, it is likely that a licence would be granted. I would just caveat that in terms of the report and the updated bat surveys that are requested. I will come to that in a moment. Amenity, the report mentions in the executive summary, but fails to set out fully in the report about amenity for future occupiers of the residential properties. So just for clarification and certainty, the internal space is sufficient in accordance with policy H15. Externally, the residential properties, the terraces have small rear gardens and private balconies, and the large detached house has its own separate terraces. The houses have a south-facing view of the canal. Whilst the external spaces on their own are considered to be a low-level provision and sub our usual substandard to what we would usually expect, which is to mimic reflect the footprint of a property, the proximity of the site to the canal towpath and Port Meadows is a material consideration, and we consider that it would sufficiently mitigate the small amenity space provided in this case, and as such accords with policy H16 of the local plan. I take the report as read in this case. There are just a few points I would like to just reiterate. It is a constrained site, and it is a challenging shape. It has been allocated for mixed use in the local plan, and then the principle of what is being proposed is acceptable. There are several different land ownerships to tackle. The applicant has designed the boatyard and community centre to a brief given by the Jericho Wharf Trust, which comprises also the Jericho Community Association and the Jericho Community Boatyard as well. The Canal and River Trust has strongly objected to, during the process of the application, to the bridge as originally submitted, both as landowner as the statutory consultee, and their letter is set out fully at Appendix 2 of the report, as you will have seen. And therefore, in order to overcome their objections, which centre around the proximity of the boatyard entrance and the boatyard basin to the bridge as originally located across to the piazza, and issues of loss of moorings for them and turning boats that would harm and be at risk of causing harm to boats in the channel up and down the canal, and therefore safety of users of the canal. They have objected to the bridge. They also have been unable to come to any agreement about the design of the bridge that reflects what it needs to do for them, which is to provide a footpath underneath the bridge for horse-drawn boats, people on bicycles, mounted on the bicycles, and pedestrians, but also provide space around the back of the bridge. Particularly, this is about on the canal towpath side. Allow people to move around the outside of the bridge as well, whilst also providing an accessible bridge for everybody at this time. To do that, you would have to build into the canal in order to support the bridge, and this also had impact on turning of boats and the navigational safety, and also concerns from the Environment Agency then about this impede into the canal and flooding. In terms of viability, this is a key issue for this site, and the fact that now the application does not provide any affordable housing on the site and cannot provide a contribution to affordable housing elsewhere off-site. Officers consider that the viability, the independent assessment has demonstrated robustly that the proposed development is not viable to provide affordable housing. This has been robustly tested. There is concern about values and relative values to properties in Jericho, but these have to be like for like comparables, directly comparables, which in this case would be new builds, townhouses, and the most directly comparable to this site is Wolvercut and also Barton Park. And I stress new builds because I know evidence people have suggested that resale of properties or period properties applies, but it is new builds. I also wanted, just for information, to highlight the fact that car parking provision generates value, and that's why car parking is proposed as part of this application, as opposed to previously being car free. In terms of the site, as I mentioned earlier, there are protected species on site, in particular pipistrelle day bat roosts. The bat surveys are out of date, and in order to be satisfied that the Natural England licence and we have had due regard to bats, we are recommended that should committee be minded to approve this application, a decision is not issued until updated surveys have been done, so that we are sure that the number of roosts is recorded and sufficient mitigation measures proposed. Considerable weight and importance has been given to the desirability of preserving and enhancing designated heritage assets and their settings. This includes the listed building, the church and the conservation area, the setting of the canal, and also the demolition of listed walls, and in the case of the listed building application, the new ramp and seating. We consider any harm has been justified by the design, and that the public benefits of the scheme outweigh any harm in this case. In terms of residential amenity, the development would have an overbearing impact and reduction in sunlight at certain times of the year to some of the adjacent properties, which you will see in the report. However, weighing in balance all material considerations and the constraints of the site in this urban location, we consider the public benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm in this case. There would be loss of a tree, which provides significant public benefit amenity, which is the ash tree in the car park to St Barnabas. Excuse me. The constraints of the site mean that reprovision of a like-for-like net gain in canopy cover is not feasible on this site, and this has been accepted in this case. The site is within flood zone 3A and 3B. The EA has recommended approval subject to conditions, their previous objections overcome. The development would provide suitable compensation and mitigation measures, and officers are satisfied that the operation of the new boatyard would not be unduly compromised by these measures. Thank you, Chair.
Sally?
If we are taking both items together, I think Felicity was going to mention that the listed building application recommendation included the Section 106 agreement.
Yes.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, sorry. Indeed, that's right. We would like to just change the recommendation for the listed building application to tie in with the recommendation for the full application, which is, as on page 23, that the applications be approved subject to conditions, and the agreement of Section 106 agreement, subject to receipt of further updated bat surveys and details of mitigation and enhancement measures as necessary, and delegated to the Head of Planning Services to finalise conditions the agreement and issue the decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We should have said earlier on that we are taking items 4 and 5 together, and so on that basis we have some speakers who would like to speak against. We have Dr. Phyllis Starkey, David Feeney and David Edwards on behalf of the Jericho Wharf Trust, Councillor Lizzie Diggins and George Taylor, resident. By convention, we offer you 2 minutes each. It is up to you how you divide up your time between yourselves. If you'd like to come forward, we offer equal time to those speaking against, to those speaking for, and so the applicants will also have up to 10 minutes if they wish to address us. Don't have to spend all that time, but you're most welcome to do so. Do please come up in whatever numbers you see fit. Would it be helpful for us to let you know at any point when your 6 minutes is up, as it were. Okay.
Yes, is this on now?
So first
And
off,
it's red.
the objections are the
You're on.
Jericho Wharf Trust,
Fantastic.
3 people
Thanks
from
very
there.
much, Councillor Cook.
Let's hear what
I'm
they've
Phyllis
got to say.
Starkey, a resident of Jericho and the chair of the Jericho Wharf Trust. For the last 4 years, the Jericho Wharf Trust has been working constructively with this developer to ensure that their scheme delivered the community facilities that the council's own planning guidance requires. Sadly, all of this changed when the evolution report was published, and the developer responded by dropping their own higher revenue forecast and removing all affordable housing from the scheme. It was clear to us that the house values assumed in the evolution report simply did not reflect the reality of house values in Jericho. We commissioned an expert report to test the evolution findings, and David Edwards will speak to that report after me. And in February, we wrote to the council to express our serious concerns about the evolution report's methodology. There is overwhelming opposition from the local community on both sides of the canal, from boaters as well as St Barnabas Church Council, to this planning application, particularly the absence of a bridge into the square, the reduced size of the square, and of course, the lack of affordable housing. And this is shown in the responses to the councils and also to the developer's own consultation. This application shortchanges the council and the community by about £6 million, and we urge the planning committee to reject it entirely.
Good evening. I'm David Edwards. I'm a Chartered Planning and Development Surveyor, Fellow of the RICS, and also had the pleasure of being Executive Director at the City Council in times past. I would respectfully suggest that the Planning Committee should reject this application in its entirety. The officer's report, as you've heard, relies fundamentally on a flawed viability assessment from the consultant's evolution, and this really has distorted the entire scheme. The value of private housing has been dropped by 20%, about 6 million is missing in terms of planning obligations. There's no much needed affordable housing, and as we've heard, it's now all private housing. The requirements for a bridge, which the Canal and River Trust are actually now considering, and a decent public square have been dropped, and the other policies that you would have found in the canal side SPD have simply been ignored. Well, how did we get here? Jericho market evidence shows that the canal side housing here is worth at least 28.5 million. Even the developer's pessimistic valuation 2 years ago was 25 million, and Oxford values raced ahead by 18% in the following year. However, the council's consultant valued this at 23 million, well below the developer's pessimistic valuation, which is highly unusual, and 20% below market values. Of course, the developer took advantage, accepted the evolution valuation, removed all the affordable housing, and then blamed the council's viability assessment. No questions were asked of the council's consultant valuer when they undercut the developer's commercial valuation, when they failed to find any sales evidence in Jericho, when they only chose evidence from 3 unrelated developments miles away in Barton, Headington and Wolvercote, saying that all the values there were the same and were the same as Jericho, when we know that Jericho is one of the most expensive places in Oxford. Why was the value of the site itself ignored? Prime canal frontage, conservation area, and the setting of a Grade 1 listed church all have a value and a premium, which was not even discussed. Why was the council's cost consultant ignored when they said freezing costs now was to the detriment of the community, unfair and short-sighted? Yet this committee is asked to accept a flawed viability assessment and an assurance that RICS guidance was followed, which it very definitely was not. And in exchange for this, the possibility of a small share of the developer's final profit that leaves Jericho with a poor scheme, no affordable homes, no square, or decent square, no bridge, and little chance of the community to fundraise for its facilities. The committee knows that it is not under any obligation to take advice from developers' agents or other consultants, especially if this is flawed. Of course, we're tired of this saga, and there's no reason for this site to be vacant. The developer said when he put in the original application he could afford the affordable housing, and plenty of other developers could deliver it. The council has the powers to make this happen and already has £1 million for Jericho housing unspent. Please reject this application. Let's move forward quickly with a better scheme we can all support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks.
That's okay. Thank you very much. We have the balance of the time available to the other two speakers if they like to come and address us. Don't worry, we've stopped the clock.
Who lives at the bottom of Great Clarendon Street, very close to the site. In general, as you've heard, the proposal fails to do well any of the things needed to make a new heart for Jericho, which is what we were looking for in 1999 when this project got going. In particular, what concerns me is that it's too dense. An extra story bookending the terrace of canal front buildings overshadows my particularly low semi-detached house and that of my neighbour at number 59 Great Clarendon Street, which you saw on one of the slides. And it significantly reduces the amount of light, according to the documents. The flats over the car parking, butting almost to my neighbour's house sidewall, together with the detached house on stilts on the other side of the road, and a rather immense structure, will box in and change the pleasant character of the road. Jericho is losing its character through this. Please reconsider and at least take one floor off the terraces at this end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Lizzie, as I think many of you know. And I just want to say I'm really disappointed that we've ended up with a development with no affordable homes at all. Jericho desperately needs new affordable homes for its families and for others. And this is something that's been raised with me time and time again by local residents, particularly that they know that their children will not be able to afford to live in the area that they grew up. This development was meant to offer a host of community goods which would work together to bring a positive new canalside square to Jericho. It was meant to give Jericho a new bridge, connecting communities, linking Jericho to the Rewley Road area and ensuring the vitality of the square, a properly functioning boatyard for the boating community, a new self-sustaining community centre to replace our currently not quite fit for purpose and inaccessible space, and a public square for community use, which was meant to be large enough for community events and use, and affordable houses on one of the last sites in Jericho, or rather the last site in Jericho. Over time, we've lost nearly all of these elements, including the affordable housing in regretful totality, and a reduction in the size of the square and the removal of a bridge into the square. I know the local community feels incredibly let down that we have ended up with a development of dense, high-cost housing instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to the applicant, Oliver Holland. Mr. Holland, you have up to 10 minutes to address us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors.
This is the developer of the scheme, Oliver Holland from Cornerstone Land.
And we are the developer responsible for the development or the hopeful development at Jericho Wharf. We are a private company based in Bowbrook, and we have experience of delivering high quality schemes in Oxfordshire, including at Grantham House on Cranham Street. We note the disappointment, some of the speakers today, but I'm grateful to the officers for a very thorough assessment over the past 20 months, and that they have recommended it for approval so robustly. This is a difficult site, and it has lain undeveloped for almost 3 decades, but it is an important site in Jericho, and it rightly carries a high degree of community expectation. That is why, prior to this submission, we consulted widely and amended our original proposals to reflect the City Council's comments and the desire of the Jericho Wharf Trust. This application proposes £7.3 million worth of contributions to community assets. The majority of the cost of these is within the tailored package being delivered to the JWT. First, we are providing the land adjacent to the Dawson Place garages for a two-phase, nearly 19,000 square foot community centre. As you have heard, we will build phase 1 to shell and core to help ensure its overall delivery. This overcomes the problem associated with the previous scheme that simply proposed the transfer of vacant land and left the entire burden of funding and building the community centre to the Jericho Wharf Trust. Our proposal means that a tangible asset will be delivered, which makes sourcing the funding for the fit out and then phase 2 that much simpler. When fully completed, the centre will be the second largest in Oxford, second only to Rose Hill, and more than twice the size of the next biggest centre. By itself, phase 1 will provide an impressive space which is 3 times larger and infinitely more usable than the centre it is replacing. We are also providing for 42 bike spaces to promote sustainable transport. Second, we will build the 3-dock boatyard designed to the community specification, again to shell and core, to replace the single dock that was closed in 1992. Because it has been tailored to the Jericho Wharf Trust requirements, it is larger and carries a greater cost than what would be required for a commercially run boatyard. But crucially, this allows the JWT to run as a community enterprise. Third, the development will transform the entrance to the Grade 1 listed St Barnabas Church, opening it out onto an attractive piazza. This space will host a grand new stone entrance to the church, which you've seen, with a wheelchair accessible access ramp. It will also create an attractive hub on the canal side, with a cafe opening out onto it and with ample space for events in association with the community centre and the church. Since the application was submitted in mid-2020, there have been 2 revisions, both of which are fully explained in the officer's report. The first is the removal of the bridge into the piazza. As you've heard, the statutory consultees objected to the bridge based on navigational safety and flood risk respectively. Assuming that no acceptable design of a bridge into the piazza is forthcoming, the 4th contribution that we are making is a £655,000 payment to deliver a DDA compliant bridge at Mount Place. This will replace the existing crossing, which is both at the end of its lease and is also unfit for purpose. Any of you who have tried to use it will know how difficult it is to even get a bike across it. The second change is that we have had to regrettably move 33A Canal Street from the application. The assessment of the application's viability has been thorough and it was comprehensive. It followed national planning guidance and was reviewed on behalf of the council by RICS accredited surveyors. It confirms that the application cannot support more than the contributions it is making to community assets. In fact, the review actually concluded the scheme is delivering more than might be expected. The loss of affordable housing is keenly felt in Jericho, and so we have agreed that the financial assessment should be underpinned with a review mechanism. This means that if the sale of the new homes does outperform market expectations and the development generates any more profit than is expected, then 60% of that surplus would be automatically clawed back for the council, and this could be made available to spend on affordable housing in the area. We have been grateful for the interest shown and the contributions made by local stakeholders towards this application. Our consultation events have been really well attended, and at the most recent in February, 60% of respondents supported the proposed regeneration of the site, with the overriding sentiment being that local residents wanted to see something happen. The scheme now proposed strikes a careful balance between the competing aspirations that the communities have for the site. It is deliverable and it is financially viable. After 3 decades, this proposal would breathe new life into the Jericho Wharf Boatyard, and I hope that you'll support the officer recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to councillor questions. So can I trouble you to turn the microphone off on the side of you? So questions from members of the committee. Liz.
I've got a couple of questions for the planners, really. There are clearly serious questions about the viability appraisal and about the City Council's evolution assessment of that appraisal. And since then, we've had 2 highly reputable experts. We've had Farah Huxley and we've had David Edwards, whom we've heard tonight. Can you tell me what the response has been as a result of those 2 experts coming forward? Have we, for instance, looked at finding better comparators than Barton, Wolvercote and Headington? That's my first question.
Do you want to? second one as well.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. The second question is about the fact that if this application goes through tonight, there will be problems fundraising for the core and the shell to be built up to the height that's necessary to be turned into proper buildings. JWT, this umbrella organisation, says it's got to find 1.22 million, and it'll have to do that within 12 months. They say that there are significant risks about being able to do that. It's a very short amount of time for a small umbrella organisation to do it. And they can't present the funders with a really attractive proposition, because the square is going to be smaller, much smaller than it was under the previous application that got planning permission. It's only 26% of usable space compared to the previous one, so it's a huge difference. And there's an overbearing boatyard and our community centre, which may not attract funders. So my second question is, if it goes through tonight, are you not making it almost impossible for the boatyard and the community building to go ahead, so that they will be left unbuilt for any amount of time as a result? Thank you.
Officers. Can you turn on?
Sorry, I thought I had. The viability consultant is here to answer questions specifically about the viability. And the point about other sites and comparables might be best to come from Alison, from the Assessor Evolution PDR on that front. In relation to your second question about fundraising for the Wharf Trust, it's outside the remit of the planning consideration how the Wharf Trust goes about funding the shell and the phase 2 of the community centre. Is not a material planning consideration.
Yep, by all means.
Much. Of course, it is very material for the community who has to raise the money. And if the planning application goes through, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to do that. So it may not be a material planning consideration, but it's one we have to take into account when we decide whether we're going to approve this application tonight. Is it a viable application, in fact, from the point of view of the communities surrounding the boatyard?
Sorry, Liz, it isn't a material planning consideration how a third-party organisation raises money for a building. It's not a planning material consideration. What we're looking at here is delivering a community centre, a large community centre, to phase 1, which meets and also is better than the existing community centre. And phase 2, which when built would add on to that, and according to the community association will provide for them well into the future and make it viable, so it will continue. There is a mix of uses on this site. It is constrained, and in order to deliver the building, we are looking at the mixture of uses on this site, and you have to bear that in mind when making a decision on this site, that there are going to be compromises here, and this is the best to achieve something at this moment in time before you. But I'm afraid fundraising for the building in the future is not a material planning consideration.
Yeah.
Good evening, committee. I'm Alison Blakeway. I'm the Evolution PDR consultant who's been working with the city over the last 20 months or so on this viability appraisal. So just in terms of the way we look at assessments when we're doing these, what it's important that we do is that we do actually compare like with like. And effectively, the developer tried to do this in his original appraisal and in subsequent appraisals. I've tried to do it in my appraisals. And to a certain extent, what we have to take into account is the fact that the existing area of Jericho and the part of Jericho where this site is based, and I think you saw it from Felicity's photos, is quite different to what is being proposed. And so therefore, when we look at the comparables, we have to look at various elements of that. And that is including, you know, what is the new build market achieving within Oxford? And ideally, you'd have a site right next door that's building out and, you know, building pretty much similar properties. Now, that does not happen in Jericho, unfortunately, just because of the nature of the place it is. I do appreciate that it is one of those places that has got one of the highest values in Oxford going. So the way we've looked at the appraisals, or when we look at the appraisals, I've had to have a look at the existing market and the existing properties and say, well, are they, what's proposed, pretty much comparable to what's in the market already? And if you look at the Jericho market, I think the answer to that has to be no, it isn't. It's something very, very different. What we've got here is properties that are much bigger in their scale. They're 3 stories opposed to generally 2. They are very, very modern compared to something that's very much more traditional. And so what you're trying to do then is you start to move out from the site to see where other similar schemes are taking place. Now, the developer in his appraisal also referred to Rivercote Mill and drew on quite a lot of evidence around that, as well as looking at the existing market. And in their original appraisal, they were suggesting that new build values in Rivercote Mill, some Carla Home, other Carla Home sites, generally were moving at around between £500 and £600 per square foot. In their appraisal, they were saying, we're going to pitch this at 820, on average, and £820 a square foot. And that was really without any degree of robust evidence that would suggest that that was a figure that was actually achievable in sales values, either within the existing Jericho market or within the existing or the new build market that's developing in around Oxford. And part of the problem we have with Oxford is that there isn't a huge amount of similar schemes going on. So, you know, you could look at a bog standard Persimmon scheme who build nice 2-bedroom, 2, 3, 4-bedroom houses in 2 stories with gardens front and rear. But that's not what we've got here. So you can't really take those schemes into comparison. And we're trying to find schemes that are canal side, that are roughly about 2,000 square feet in terms of the 3 and 4-bedroom houses. And really reflecting some of the design qualities that this scheme really brought to life in terms of some of the new design elements that were being brought in. Now, as I said, the developer really, at the time the original appraisal was done, couldn't really demonstrate that the figure they pitched at was a price that they felt was robust. It was something that was, if you want, you know, they sort of said, well, there's always evidence around £600 a square foot. If we're going to pitch at 820, and so my job was to go along and see whether there was anything in Oxford, really, and particularly around Jericho, that was selling at that kind of price of a similar nature. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that. I only came up with the same schemes that effectively the developer had. I was generally looking at figures at around £600 a square foot generally. But what I did in the appraisal was I did actually accept that Jericho generates its own market, that this was a new product in that market, that the proximity to the city centre was a factor. The area itself, Jericho, and the environment in which this scheme was being brought forward was also a factor. But my concern was that achieving £820 a square foot when there was no other evidence to achieve that was perhaps over optimistic. And so I suggested that we perhaps run with a value of £750 a square foot, recognising the differences between existing new builds, which are going on elsewhere, and the various nuances around this Jericho site. And that's where I started the assessment. Now, That in itself is a quite common way of looking at values. But then I've done a similar sort of comparison between, well, what does that generate in terms of house value? Because if you've got two house values or the housing schemes, which are roughly similar in terms of their offer, the difference in price could actually make the difference as to whether things are sellable or not. And so what I did was then I looked at what the values were in terms of house prices. Generally, the court was suggesting that 3 and 4 bedroom houses, 3-bedroom houses would sell between 1.3 and 1.6 million, and 4-bedroom houses would sell between around the 1.8 million mark. Again, in terms of looking at that evidence, it was very difficult to find something in Jericho that would support that kind of value. They also suggested apartments and maisonettes would be around 800,000 to £1 million. What I've done in the appraisal then is looked at the 750 and so said, right, okay, well, how does that work through? And you end up with figures in the region of 920 to 950 for the apartments, and between 1.1 and 1.5 million for the residential, so the 3-bed houses, 3-4-bed houses. Now, again, I know the Jericho Wharf Trust came back and challenged that at the end of last year. And again, we went through that exercise again, just to see whether things had changed over the time the application had moved. And quite frankly, I have not been able to find significant differences to make that, to make that change. I know the Jericho Wharf Trust have presented some evidence. To be fair, I've only just seen it this afternoon, so I've not had an awful lot of time to analyse it in great detail. But the evidence that they've submitted very, very recently suggests that flats in Jericho are selling between £600 and £800, 600 and 800,000, somewhere between 800 and 900 square feet. I'm suggesting a 1,300 square foot unit, which is part of the application, is selling at 920, 950. Similar for the houses, they've picked on houses in the range of 655 to 750 pounds a square foot, suggesting they are at a significant value. The figures I'm using are 1.1 million to 1.5 million. So I think it's fair to say that the assessment has actually looked at a very robust level of assessment. And I think ultimately you've got to come down to, what is realistically achievable. Now, I think part of the problem we've got is there is limited evidence of new build within Jericho, full stop. And that is part of the issue we have in terms of determining what is the right value. I think we're also in a very strange market at the moment, given that nobody really knows how things are going to go post-COVID. And when a lot of this appraisal work was being done, we were actually in the sort of a lot of it was during lockdown and various other things. So markets were being impacted. So what we have done is we have said, there is scope for improved values here. I'll come on to the cost slide in a minute, but there is scope for improved values. And really, if you are to determine the way the application is to, whichever way you want to determine the application, if you are minded to approve it, then perhaps the best way of recognising that values may well go up is to seek this review mechanism that the developers have put forward. And I am quite happy to recommend to the council that is something they support. I do have some caveats with that, which I'll come on to in a moment. But what that does is it enables prices as they go up to be recognised in any review mechanism. Well, I know that the Wharf Trust have also raised questions about me relatively ignoring any advice from W.H. Stevens, and that is quite clearly not the case. The initial assessment I did, I was trying to undertake a robust assessment whereby we did compare apples with apples, and we went back to what would a basic house look like, which is what the BCIS figures give you, and then sort of add on all the design parameters and things of that nature to reflect the fact that, you know, this wasn't a normal scheme. Now, the developers weren't happy with that and asked for a third-party assessment of the QS, a third-party QS assessment of costs. That QS was undertaken, and the QS figures that came back to me have been put into the final appraisal that I came up with. So I dispute the Jericho Wharf Trust in terms of what they've suggested in terms of my ignorance of what WH Stevens have advised the council and have advised me in utilising those figures. So I can confirm that the figures that WH Stevens have agreed with the developer as robust costs at this stage of the scheme are incorporated into the final appraisal in my report of December 2021. What the QS did say to us, however, was that this is a relatively early part of a, if you want, a cost plan of the scheme. It's quite normal for developers to have a, if you want, a broad approach in terms of the development of this site. And I think, you know, Felicity has already indicated that, you know, it's a constrained site. There are a number of difficulties with this site, such as dealing with canal walling, some of the constraints around remediation, some of the constraints about the land levels, and all those things also have to be addressed before any building can take place. And what he was saying was it's actually quite normal for developers to allow for some contingency within those costs. But over time, as the scheme becomes more and more refined, and this is, you know, where we are at the moment in terms of defining those costs, it is quite possible for those costs to move either upwards or downwards. And I think that is a key in where we sit with considering this application tonight. So again, what the robust mechanism, the review mechanism does, is allows for that movement of costs. And therefore, effectively, the review mechanism we've got is effectively saying, we recognise the fact that, you know, the values the developer is suggesting may be achieved, but there is no evidence to suggest that they can be achieved at this moment in time. Certainly, the time the appraisals were done, there was no evidence to suggest that. The costs are at a point where it's probably fairly early in the process to be absolutely robust about what those costs are going to be. And they have capacity to move upwards and downwards over the time the developer gets to implement the scheme. And therefore, the review mechanism looks at both aspects. It doesn't just look at values going up, it looks at costs going up or down, whichever the developer wants to choose. And I think by choosing or seeking to seek a 60% surplus going to the council, you have to make sure that there is an incentive to the developer to try and drive those costs down to make it as an efficient build as he possibly can. And I can assure you, builders don't genuinely try to push costs any higher than they actually have to be. And they will also maximise values. So ultimately, I think by putting this review mechanism in place, you're actually saying, well, we recognise there are these nuances around values and around costs. And, you know, this review mechanism enables those things to be adjusted over time, and we can take that review as we come forward, as the scheme comes forward. I think it's 75% of the scheme is implemented. So I'm quite happy to review that. The only recommendation I would make is to ensure that any detail in that agreement is firmly and robustly and clearly stated as to what it is going to include and what it isn't, just so that when you come to implement that scheme and you come to review that scheme at this point in time in the future, it's absolutely clear what you intended at this point in time. I'd just like to, if I can, just pick up on the point around the problems of fundraising for the development. I appreciate it's not necessarily a planning consideration, but I do believe that. Okay, all right, I won't. Okay, I'll leave that then. In that case, then, Chair, I'll leave that there. I think I've said what I need to say.
Yes, I think that's probably the longest answer we've ever had to a question from a councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Fairweather.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. Could the officers clarify how the Section 106 agreement figure of 60% was arrived at? Secondly, two questions about the bridge at Mount Place. Will this be enough to fund a new bridge? And will this bridge cater adequately for cyclists? And finally, a relatively minor point, could they clarify why there's no condition about the heating to be used in these proposed buildings?
Thank you. The reference to 60% in the review mechanism comes from the Lord Mayor of London and the review mechanism there, which we have also used recently on Oxford North. So it's an accepted percentage in a review mechanism. In terms of the Mount Place Bridge, the sum was for a replacement bridge, a sort of, I suppose, basic level replacement bridge. That, of course, the intention is to make it accessible for everybody, including cyclists. The City Council recognises that it's the most awful bridge to go up and down, you know, even if you're a pedestrian. So yes, it would improve it considerably. And in terms of a condition, apologies if it's been missed off, but I thought there was a condition that secured the sustainable design and construction in accordance with the document that was submitted. And if it's messed off, I will just have a quick look. We would put that on. Yes, condition 19.
Yep.
If I can just jump in about the review mechanism, it is a tried and tested method. The normal percentages that start to bear out, because there has to be an incentive for the developer to achieve the best values as possible, it usually sits in and around 50% or lower. We've negotiated that to be the other side of that 50% in order to maximise the potential for return for affordable housing going forward if values are achieved.
Councillor Chapman.
Maybe we could pursue the review mechanism a little bit in a bit more detail. I'd like to know a bit more about the time frame of it. I understand the 60% point, but I mean, it could take quite a long time for these houses to be sold on. And some might be sold on quickly, some might be sold on a decade later. So, I mean, whose responsibility is it to supervise this whole process so that we know we're going to get our 60% of any profits that are made and the developer will get their 40%? And secondly, obviously, there's a risk, isn't there, that the company that's built the houses morphs, changes over time. And therefore, again, I'm concerned about, you know, how we can be absolutely sure that we're monitoring all this really closely and that we'll know what the numbers are and what the profits are and what the benefits for social housing could be. That's my first area. My second area is a bit confused about the car-free versus car parking issue here. When this case came forward in 2016 and was approved, it was a car-free development. Now it has a number of car parking spaces attached to it, but the situation, the venue has not changed. The availability of shops has not changed. The availability of buses has not changed. So what is it that has caused the planning officers to be sanguine about the fact that there should be car parking spaces offered when there were no car parking spaces offered a number of years ago? My other question is, well, the third question is around the Canal and Riverboat Trust, I think they're called, those who manage the canals. I mean, what weight did the planning officers put upon the fact that in this report, there is a lot of disquiet from that particular trust about the proposals in front of us? And I'd like to get a sense of how far that was a really big issue for planning officers when they thought about it, or they thought they could be solved, or what, because it's quite unusual to have such a major player, I think, still expressing disquiet after many interactions on a matter of this kind, and they're key players in it. They're not minor players; they're key players in the story. And finally, I was struck by the developer when he said, sadly, some land was removed from the application. So I'd like to ask the developer, you know, as I understand it, and this could be wrong, so please correct me, planning officers, if I've got this wrong. But again, in 2016, there seemed to be more land available on the table to therefore enable some social housing to be built. So am I understanding it right? That there is land in this application, as it were, which is not on the table, and that's one of the factors which has led the social housing not to be possible. And that's the references back to the sadly point that the applicant spoke about rather briefly in his submission. So those are my areas. So it's yeah, pretty clear. Thank you.
In terms of land, in fact, it's the reverse. So this application started out with more land than the previous application. The previous application site was exactly the same as what you see before it now. The difference has been that the original, as originally submitted, this application included number 33 Canal Street, which is the existing community centre, which has now been lost as part of that. So that's the difference in the land point. In terms of the cars and car parking, basically the car parking spaces generate a value. And in this case, yeah, the applicant, that value, added value of 50k approximately per space is key to adding into the viability of the scheme for them. Despite what everybody thinks, the review mechanism and the time scale for reviewing is, I need to just look that up, but it's not after the first house is sold, or you know, they're on after a house is sold and resold. It's normally within the construction period time when, and we'll have to look this up, but when a certain number of houses have been sold, so it's at a time where we can then see what the real values are of it. And if you, unless Adrian knows off the top of his head, I can look that up and come back to you. I think that was all your questions, unless I missed one, sorry.
It's just, I just wanted to just tie down this thing about the timescale of the selling. So is it when the properties are sold for the first time? Because obviously there's a lag, isn't there, from when they're built to when they're sold. If the value of the properties is higher than expected, then you get some sort of payback towards social housing, or is it not the first time? It's, you know, they're occupied, they're lived in for a few years, and then they're sold on, and then that it's the first time, is it?
Yes, not before. Sorry, if not before the first time. So it's during the construction. So as the viability consultant says, we can look at how the actual costs are pitching, whether the actual costs have gone up or gone down, and whether the actual realised values of the properties have gone up or down. So it's during the construction process, but not after the first, you know, not after they've sold and thereafter, if that makes sense.
And finally, the issue about the Canal River Trust and what weight you put upon their serious points they've made and concerns they still have about the scheme.
Well, in this case, I mean, we have given great weight to their comments. They are the landowner, and they own and operate and look after the waterway and the canal. So their concerns were given great weight in terms of the bridge, the basin, the winding hole, and the navigational safety. They look after the moorings, and there's, you know, they obviously got the college cruisers and their tenants next door. So great weight is given to those issues in particular. They aren't happy with the size and the height and massing of the canal and boatyard, and the community centre building and its presence on the waterway there. And this they raised at the previous application. And, you know, it is a big building. there is no getting away from that, but it is justified in the sense that the community centre, the community association was asked to do a needs survey to see whether or not the multi-space, multifunctional hall, which is key to their provision, is actually needed, because that is what's driving the size and the massing of this building at this point in the plot, in the site. So the needs assessment actually demonstrated that yes, there is a need for a multifunctional sports hall, and therefore we've looked with the architects at any possible way to reduce the height, to create reduce massing along that side. And so whilst in that respect we have taken on board their comments in that, but we feel like, you know, it is justified in this case. Okay, sorry, thank you.
I mean, just on the monitoring of the review mechanism, it will be set out in the obligation what stages it will be at to make sure we capture as much information in order to capture as much of the value as possible, so everybody is clear what's being looked at and examined. The Canal River Trust, I just want to say, is they've been quite clear cut with us in their views. It isn't, well, tapering around the edges. Technically, it can't be done. And so that carries greater weight because we've discussed it back and forth with the applicant at some length to find other alternatives. So it isn't as if we just, oh, that's the end of the story. There was a lot of discussion that took place to find alternatives, but that was not possible here. The last bit to do with the car parking you asked about, the simple factor is the car parking adds great value in this instance. So it was taken as from what officers' perspective that was necessary to again try and achieve, if possible, a value that would have a return for affordable housing. It added enough value to then pay for all the other asks, but not enough sufficiently to add value to require affordable housing in this instance.
Councillor Remen and then Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've heard twice about 33 Canal Street being removed. I get it's been removed. Could somebody answer why specifically that it's been removed? Or did I miss that? That's number one. I'm worried about the car park on sort of £1 million houses, as the Evolution lady said. If it's deemed £50,000, that's not a great deal of money instead of losing sociable housing on there. So I don't think that works. I've got some comments to make on the financial viability, but I'll leave that for the comments.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure that the removal of the community centre is relevant to this application, but it might be a quick answer from officers would be able to satisfy that curiosity.
Just a quick answer is that the community centre is owned by the church, and they would also, it was to do with reciprocal land values for the applicant to convert the existing community centre to affordable housing or to residential affordable housing provision, and land values on the site, and provide something for the church on the site that could be agreed to. Then as the viability came forward with all the assessment and the costs, and the viability demonstrated the affordable housing couldn't be provided, the applicant chose to take the community centre out of that. The benefit also of taking it out of the, one of the issues that it resolved, I should say, rather than benefit, is the timing of the reprovision, the closure of the existing community centre and the reprovision of the new community centre. There was obviously a concern that that if one was not provided before the other one shut, then we might lose the community facility altogether. So hence why it was removed from the site.
Councillor Raymond, to put it more bluntly, it was a complication too far, I think, is probably what the officer was trying to tell us. Do you have something else?
Yes, actually.
Yeah,
So
yeah, go for it.
yeah, so I understood that as the developer wasn't willing to pay the amount of money that was required for Canal Street into the financial viability of the rest of the story, rest of the project. And just another quick note, what I forgot earlier on, I do recall 2 and 16 Abbey Road. They back onto the canal in Botley. Was that something that could be taken? I think that was about 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe some members know better than me. I know one of those properties 4 years ago was sold for about 1.2 million. So I'm worried about that we've gone so far to Wolvercut and Barton, especially when the price of the land has been valued at Jericho prices, but how Prowse prices are valued at somewhere that's 5, 6 miles away and outside. It was going to be a comment, but I'll say it now. Because Oxford prices in Jericho equivalent to central London. So I think maybe that should have been taken into consideration.
I think you're talking about the Carla Holmes application, and it was backing onto the River Thames rather than the canal, which may well be a different different comparator that we perhaps need not go there, as it were. Okay, Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think we're all picking up that there is a lot of disquiet about the valuation that's been done here, especially given that the evolution report went 20% less, £6 million less below what the developer said, and the developer surely must have gone for the lowest end of what they thought they could get away with. So I find that very disquieting. I appreciate that we're trying to put in an insurance policy here that with a clawback clause, this review mechanism, which, okay, great, that if it turns out that it has been severely undervalued, we would have that chunk of money, which we could use for social housing, but we couldn't use it for social housing here. We couldn't have them then in Jericho. And that is, you know, all our plans are about trying to get in the city, you know, a good mixed balance of housing. So I was struck by the fact that one of our illustrious speakers mentioned that the RICS, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure it's something important, the RICS guidance was not followed. So I guess I'm asking our planning team, you know, can we not revisit this? I mean, this seems, the clawback mechanism for me, it's not going to be enough because it won't allow us to have social housing here on this site. I don't know what we can do. Can we delay this, review this to look at it again? I mean, were you worried by the fact that that evolution gave a value even lower than the developer has? I mean, that must be really unusual. Normally, our independent one would go higher than a developer. Sorry, I'm musing here, but
segueing into comments, which
yeah.
is fine because I'm not seeing any more questions.
So,
but it's
so
the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors that you're after. Oh, we have some more questions.
Just quickly,
that's
but
fine.
could that form the basis of a refusal if that was what we decided to do?
There's a couple of points there. It has been put across that RICS guidance wasn't followed. You heard from our cost consultants that we took all that guidance into account, although the answer was quite long, but it was quite in depth and addressed those issues. So the assumption has been that those other comments are based in expert opinion, etc., but they are just comments, that no physical financial appraisal has been put on the table from any other party. So those discussions have been at some length from our cost consultants with the developers' cost consultants to go all over those figures at some length. And I'm satisfied that in that duration of time, it's been a robust process. If I thought otherwise, I would indicate, no, we need to get further information, or I'd give the applicant a further opportunity to review those figures. And that happened at the beginning of that process. We had a lot of discussion about those, and that they were revised and addressed accordingly throughout that process. So I don't think that it is a flawed process that's been implied here at all. If members, though, come to the view that they want to have further advice, you can take that view and send me away to further the application. But my advice is that you don't need to do that. You have enough information here to make a decision. I acknowledge it is a tough decision to make, but it is one. This application comes with a big load of asks and a lot of cost associated, and that needs to be borne in mind. The risk of deferment trails the decision back to the applicant, and he has a right to go to appeal for non-determination, and then it gets played out there with the information that you've already got. So my advice is not to. You have enough information here at this moment in time to make the decision.
To be fair, I think if, as an applicant, you were presented with a better outcome, you are less likely to question the valuation. So I think that's Turkey's voting for Christmas if you were to take up that opportunity for another roll of the dice. I have Councillor Fry and then Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if you live in Oxford and look at the advertisements in the paper, there is a Jericho premium. I mean, estate agents claim Jericho stretches all over the place. If you look, there is clearly a premium. And I would be very interested, we haven't asked the objectors, who clearly have done a lot of work, and it was referred to in that very long rambling comment from the expert about something she said she hadn't seen. But I would be very interested to get the objectors maybe to explain how they calculated the value in terms of housing in Jericho, please.
I think as we've given such latitude to our expert from Evolution, we should be giving equal latitude to the objectors. Thank you.
That's very kind, Chair. It'll make it a long night, and I'll try and be a bit more succinct. Quite simply, the council's consultant valuer has strained every sinew to look at modern current development, and that has taken them far and wide, up to Barton, off to various other parts, 2 or 3 miles away. That's fine, but that's only one component of evaluation. Location, as everybody knows, is a pretty important determinant, and that can change in terms of value with 2 or 3 streets, not 2 or 3 miles. There is evidence in Jericho. You have to look for it, and there isn't much of it, but what there is significant and forms a pattern. So Cranham Street, you've got the Grantham House development, which some councillors will be very familiar with, and that is on, you have it on the market at the moment. Flats and so on have been sold or on or about £1,000 a square foot, and that is evidence. Now, you may say it's not in a 500 unit scheme up at Barton, but it is nevertheless evidence of a modern development. Similarly, you go next door to the Lucy Ironworks scheme, Foundry House. Again, you are getting now values in flats up to £1,000 a square foot. Now, valuers can have a marvelous time picking over the minutiae of this particular scheme or that particular scheme. But at the end of the day, location is pretty important. There are other factors as well, which I haven't even added onto this. You know, you have a canal side premium. The street I live in, you will get at least £50,000 more if you're in the expensive seats next to the canal. You know, you add that up, that would come to £1 million on this scheme. You look at the churchyard setting, you're in a conservation area. All these points were not picked up in the Evolution report at all. There's also too what's called a new buyer premium. In other words, people like to buy certain parts of the market, like to buy new homes. Now, I haven't added that onto this. So there's a lot of factors in there that you can argue about. But at the end of the day, the valuer's job is to look at all this evidence. And one of the key issues that is in the RICS guidance, apart from the issues of the importance of location and all of that, is if there is a scarcity of evidence, and there is evidence here, it's not everything, but there is a lot of evidence around, then you're supposed to draw all this together. You're then supposed to analyze it. You're then supposed to compare it, triangulate it, and come to a narrative or a framework where the value sits. And if you don't do that, then you're not following RICS valuation guidance. And I'm afraid this has not happened here. What we've had is a focus on 3 new build current schemes somewhere else, and then the simplifying assumption, just bring it back to Jericho and they're all the same. The world isn't like that, and everybody in this room, I suggest, knows that you cannot buy a house in Jericho for the price of a house in Barton or Headington. The world isn't, common sense isn't like that. You also heard from the valuer that basically values haven't moved at all. Well, if you wanted to have a look at the land registry index data, this is based on sites, on sales for new build housing in Oxford for the 12 months after the quad valuation, the developer's valuation was put in, prices went up 18%. And those were actual sales. The market was like a coiled spring with COVID. Now, the developer's agent said, life's very uncertain. We may never see any sales again because of COVID. The market is strong, and it came back with an absolute force. So there's a lot of evidence out there that was just simply not taken into account, not looked at, and the guidance was simply not followed. And you cannot just have somebody giving you assurance. You really have to check and challenge, particularly when, as people have pointed out here, the valuation came in below the developer's first offer on a planning negotiation. I mean, it doesn't happen very often.
Okay, thank you very much. Hang on a sec. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No, I'm quite prepared to take comments from the applicant. Yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Fry actually asked for the speaker to actually give evidence of their valuations and their expert valuation. It seemed to me what was said was just a critique of what our expert said. They haven't actually produced their own valuation or carried out a viability appraisal. So I think
the question was not to deliver a viability appraisal, it was to give examples, and that is what I heard. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, he's answered the question. Now, gentlemen, you have an opportunity also.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say the 2 people that you've heard from so far don't represent the application clearly. So the gentleman you've just heard from is clearly speaking in opposition to the scheme and views on the values of Jericho and on the scheme in particular. And Alison from Evolution PDR, up until today, has been speaking, or has been almost in opposition to the application to try and drive the best value for the scheme. So this is our opportunity, if you will, to put our side of the story across and to explain how the values have a certain story, and we believe that they are where they should be, but it's not the whole story in the viability. So I'll introduce you, Lacey, who is from Quad and has run our viability process.
Can you restrict your comments to the question that was asked, please? Okay, thank you.
I will be as brief as I possibly can. I think we've just got to be very, very careful here that we are comparing schemes that relate to the applications before us. And there's been some comparables cast around today in a document that I've seen from JWT, and that's the first time I've seen it. It's the first time I've been given those comparables. We just need to be a little bit careful. Figures of £1,000 per square foot, yes, they do occur, but we've got to look at the types of properties that they're occurring on. Those are small properties. What we're proposing here is much, much larger properties. And everyone knows, in very simple terms, if you double the size of a house, you don't double its value. Rate per foot, which is what the JWT are talking about in terms of the figures that they've said, £1,000 a foot, that means that the viability appraisal must be too low. Those are against small properties. If you look at larger properties, lo and behold, the rate per foot will fall. And the rate per foot in this area will fall to the levels that Evolution PDR have talked about, the levels that we've talked about in long, detailed discussions with the council and Evolution BDR to try and identify the value of this project. I don't think I need to say any much more than that, but the values are out there. I actually looked at, just finished on this point, I looked at this morning, because that's when I received this document, I thought, let's look at the last 24 months of sales of everything within a half mile of this site, every single transaction that's happened in the market. We've got software that looks at that. And then I looked at critically properties that are of equivalent size to the ones that we're proposing. And if you look at the average rate per foot across those, you get £715 a foot. And I think that to me is really telling. We're not at £1,000 a foot, we're not at £900 a foot. We're talking about big properties gathering quite big values. We're well up into the high stamp duty figures here of $1 million plus. That's a very high price point that we're trying to pitch here. The values are about right for the Evolution PDR. And as we've said in a number of occasions, the review mechanism will pick it up. The review mechanism will be there to make sure that everyone, if we achieve £1,000 a foot, everyone will be delighted because you get your community centre, you get all of the other benefits of the scheme come forwards confidently, and the review will pay out.
Thank you very much. Right. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Wade, I will let you back in.
It's a comment which I think is relevant at this point and a question. Can I make the comment?
Yeah.
I'm councillor for Wolvercote, which means that I know the Carla Holmes estate very well. And I looked at the figures this afternoon. These are standard bulk build houses, not what's intended at the Jericho Wharf. The most expensive 3-bed house is 780,000. I would question whether this is a proper comparator for the Jericho Wharf. That's my comment.
I think we can safely say, as the lady from Evolution said, is that there are no good comparators here. I think we just have to accept that. Okay, we now move on to comments. Do we have any comments? Who would like to kick off? Liz and then James.
It's about the public open space. This seems to me that it should be the focus of the development. According to our local plan, the public open space is a main requirement when this site is developed. It's got to be an appropriate setting for St Barnabas as well, for this church. If we're going to make it into a piazza, Italian style, then having a large piazza in front of a church would be a splendid thing to have. It would not just be a place where there could be a street market, it would be a place for people to wander about. This new one is only 25 metres at its widest point and 15 metres long in the other direction. And a lot of that isn't usable space. So I don't think that this is going to be a useful public space in the way that Jericho must have wanted for 150 years. When it was a working class district, which it certainly isn't now, they would have felt that they weren't entitled to it, but they are entitled to public space. And I think that should be the focus of the development, and that we should go for that now, and we should refuse this application until we have a proper public space in the middle of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fry and then Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Well, coming back to actually one point that Liz Wade's just made, I mean, I'm intrigued that the design review panel was not invited to comment on the much reduced public space and so on. I know they did comment on earlier applications, and I feel they probably would have had something to say about this very latest one. I know it's not obligatory, but still, I think that is a missed opportunity. but I'm coming back to the valuation, the way, I mean, I do something a bit similar occasionally for my day job. And what you do if you're comparing two things which are not that similar in terms of location is you try and find, if not identical type of housing, I'm coming back to this example, you would look, let's say, at a terraced house, 2 up, 2 down, Wolvercut, compare it with this, and you would somehow determine what is the Jericho premium, because there is a huge Jericho premium. Everybody knows that. I take the point about Canal Side. It's interesting, you've got very nearby. I was looking while we were talking just at, on the web very quickly on my phone, sort of where the old Grantham House was, looking at Waterside, looking at William Lucy Way, not at the Eagle Works, looking across. And William Lucy Way has the disadvantage of having that busy railway line behind and those university flats, which are notorious. So that reduces the value. But you do have comparators to come up with a premium, which is the Jericho premium. And I would like to suggest that any normal, I don't know how RICS does it, but from what David Edwards said, it sounds as if their methodology would take account of the premium and factor that into this. And I'm afraid it's been totally absent from what we were presented with by Alison, the expert.
Councillor Chapman and then Councillor Redmond.
Yeah, well, clearly there's a lot of concern about this application, and it's a sort of hierarchy really for me. So let me start on the social housing point. You know, we have a policy, a policy we strongly believe in, that a significant proportion of houses on a site of this scale should be social housing and social housing for rent. In this scheme, there are none. So there is no social housing for the people of Jericho. The second point is to say there's no guarantee of a contribution towards social housing anywhere in the city. What we have is, I'm sorry to put it colloquially, a sort of jam tomorrow promise, which is if profits grow and things get better, there will be some money sometime in the future for social housing in the city. So in the hierarchy of what we would really ideally like, this is coming third, not second, not first, but third in our ideal aspiration for a site of this kind. We have then made compromises on the car parking issue. We made compromises on the car parking issue in order to make the thing seem more viable. But that's quite a big sacrifice to make, actually, because we have principles about this. We have principles about the availability of car parking on new builds and their proximity to shops and buses. And in this case, we've decided not to apply that in order to help the developer, frankly, sell the houses for more money, because as we've heard, it's about £50,000 per parking place adds premium to the value of each property. So we've made a big compromise there. The third point for me is that we have a number of players here. And the Canal River Trust is an important player, and they're clearly not happy about it. And I think we need to, and while I accept officers have borne that in mind, they were very clear about that and they gave great weight to it. It's a judgment call in the end as to how much weight you give it. And I'm giving it quite a lot more weight perhaps than the planning officers are, because I'm very concerned about it. And the final point I would say is, in the end, this is an iconic site. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And to go down a road where there is so much dissent, there is so much lack of consensus about the way forward, seems to be quite dangerous. This needs to be a site which everybody can embrace, a solution that everybody can embrace, and they can move together forward in line and in step. That is not happening here. Quite clearly tonight, we've heard that. So that glue thing that's really important in developments of this kind is not present. And that, while not a precise planning issue, I quite accept, is a real life issue. And therefore I put some weight on that in coming to my view that tonight I could not support this application.
Thank you. I've had a request from Andy Murdoch to address us. I hope it will be as regards the points that have been made and brief.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just one point on the social housing issue that Councillor Chapman raised. appreciate that social housing and the delivery of social rent accommodation is an important aim for the council. I think you just have to bear in mind the planning policy that you're talking about with respect to affordable housing does have a cascade approach that takes you through circumstances where it may not be viable to provide affordable housing. So you just have to bear that one in mind in terms of, I understand the point that Councillor Chapman is making, but I think you just have to appreciate and understand that there is a cascade approach allowed for in the policy, whereby schemes may not have to deliver affordable housing if it can be demonstrated that it's not viable to do so. And that's a perfectly legitimate policy position. So just wanted to make that clear, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Councillor Remen and then Councillor Upton.
Thanks, Chair. So lots of the points I was going to raise have been said already in comments. I actually like what's there in itself, so I do like it. I think the compromise on the space with the larger community centre is really good, because the community centre has to work for everybody. But I'm really concerned about the parking spaces, and I can't get over the loss of affordable housing. I've just heard Officer Murdoch say about the housing, but when it was there first, 8 years ago, house prices have doubled. So if it was viable then, I just don't see how it's not viable now. There's lots of parties involved in this, and it just strikes me, it just stares at me that every party is bent over backwards to make this profitable for the developer. I'm trying to put that in a nice way, but I think it's just been leaned too far, if I can say it like that. I do like the design. I accept the space has got to be smaller because of the size of the community centre. 33 Canal Street Community Centre being taken away, seems the extra cost that the developer is going to bear for the bigger community centre has resulted in the 6 affordable houses being taken away. So I don't agree with the viability report even. It just troubles me. But I do like design, but those two things trouble me. Those 18 car parking spaces could be 4 affordable houses, probably.
Councillor Upton.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also really torn. This site has been sitting derelict for 18 years, and I really, really just want someone to get on and build something decent on it. This scheme does have quite a lot of positives to it. I mean, the setting of the church will be beautiful afterwards. I mean, and compared to what it is now, it'll be incomparably better. You know, having I know we're discussing it next, but the ramp access up to the church would be great. Having a cafe there. You know, the reason we wouldn't ever be getting 50% social housing here is because the developers are providing a lot of other things. They're providing the community centre and the boatyard, and those are, you know, all to be, well, part of the community centre, are all to be really valued. You know, there's, as I say, there's lots and lots of positives here. There's a few hits I can take on this one compared to the last scheme. I mean, losing the bridge, okay. It's a shame to lose it, because I think everyone would have really liked that entrance into the piazza. That would have brought people through. But I can see, I mean, it's a non-starter if the CRT, if the Canal and River Trust won't have it on their land. And I always thought it was going to be difficult to find a design of bridge that would have enough of a run-up to, you know, to allow wheelchairs and cyclists to go over it and get over the canal. I can see that's difficult. So I can accept losing the bridge. A bit of a squeeze on the square size. Again, not ideal, but I think I could accept that, because it's allowed some of the other things to be improved, like less overbearing on the vicarage, and a couple of the other houses that nearby. But then the private losing completely all of the social housing really sticks. So and especially after everything we've heard today about how unlikely it is that valuation, well, rather, I think we're all expecting that there will be a lot of money would come through that clawback clause, and as I say, that would be great, but it will not be able to be spent on social housing on this site. It would end up being somewhere else, and I think that would be a great shame. So I think I'm probably not going to support this.
Thank you. I think I'll chip in here. I think we've got to remember that there has been an approved scheme which could have been developed on this site, but hasn't. A lot is asked of this site, and so it should be. This was public land owned by British Waterways, who asset stripped this site and sold it for £7 million to a private developer. Now, the argument is whether this site is delivering what it can, or can it deliver some more? And by more, I mean in terms of social housing. Now, we have a viability study which says it can't, and the objectors say that it can. And to be fair, so did the applicants. They said it would deliver a profit, and they were able to deliver some social housing on site, right up to the point the viability study said otherwise. Now, it's clear that there is an element of subjectivity to a viability assessment, and reasonable people can reasonably come to different conclusions. And viability assessments are not like SIL calculations. In SIL, 2 + 2 = 4. In viability studies, the starting values of 2 and 2 are not always 2 and 2. And I think what we've got to look at here is not lightly setting aside our officers' advice and the advice of evolution. I think we need to satisfy ourselves that the arguments put forward by the objectors hold water. Now, there are no direct comparators here. That's not my words, that's the words of the representative of evolution. But the representative of evolution is not infallible. We've heard evidence tonight of different values, of different comparators. And I think we know that Jericho is different, if not very different. Jericho a few years ago was, I think, voted 11th best places to live in the country. What did the Oxford Mail say? Neighbourhood was named as the UK's 11th most hip destination in 2017. But only the very wealthy will be able to afford a home there. A mid-market property costs an eye-watering 1.732 million, according to the Sunday Times. This is almost 5 times as much as the unspoilt country town of Charlbury in the northwest of the county, where the average home costs £353,000. Now, I think we know that there is a premium for Jericho property, and it's difficult to express that premium as a value given the number of property transactions that have gone on, and the fact that we are comparing apples and pears. But I tell you now, Barton and Wolvercote won't be on the best Sunday Times best 100 list anytime soon. I think we've got to take a view on what we think the values of this site are likely to accrue. And this is a site where the City Council is contributing housing land, the Dawson Place garages. And I think it's unconscionable that we as a City Council are putting housing land towards this scheme and not receiving the benefit of social housing, some social housing as a result. Any improved values and the 60-40 split and all that sort of stuff is not going to deliver social housing on this site. And that's what we desperately need. Otherwise, it's social cleansing and nobody is able to live in nice places like Jericho. The 60% may well be the figure that is accepted in London. That's London, it's not Oxford. I cannot support this application, and I'm going to propose refusal, and refusal for the reason that I don't think the viability study has taken sufficient account of the Jericho value that will accrue, I have absolutely no doubt, from these houses coming to pass. That's all I'll say. Any further comments? Thank you. Okay. Unless there's any further comments, we have had a proposal to refuse. And Sally.
Usually when the committee is thinking of overturning the officer's recommendation, you would actually ask the planning officers just to give some advice on the reasons for refusal that have been put forward. I don't know whether Adrian or Felicity want to do that or not, but I think just should be given the opportunity to.
I do. The bit for me is what's been cited to do with the value potentially isn't, I don't think, is substantial enough to warrant a reason for refusing itself. I think you need to link it that the viability doesn't provide sufficient value to generate affordable housing. I think that's where your link is, and we can frame a reason around that that could then be defended, and we could tie that back to the policies that are set out in the report.
Sally.
Could I suggest then that you delegate the precise reasons for the reason for refusal to the officers to formulate into and to refer to policies rather than formulate it now?
Absolutely. I mean, my learning on this planning committee over the past 20 years is that you keep your reasons brief. I am very happy for Adrian's interpretation of my brevity to be expanded to cover the ground that it needs to cover in terms of sustaining a successful appeal, if that's how it goes forward. So yes, I'm very happy to agree that, and that would be our standard way of going forward. Councillor Upton.
Just wondering, could we also add in a reason around it not fulfilling what we envisage in our local plan it would in terms of community space, as in the piazza, the size of the piazza not fulfilling everything that we would want from it? Again, I'm very happy to see whether Adrian or Felicity could flesh that out.
I must say that the actual policy wording doesn't prescribe a specific area or space. It just says, actually, I was just going to quote it and it's just gone straight out of my head. But I think it would be very difficult to stand up to an appeal to refuse it on the basis that it's possibly not quite as big as we wanted it to be, if you see what I mean, without a quantum to back it up in the policy or the supporting wording text of the of the policy. And as I said, and the SPT has no material weight, so there is nothing really to go on that, Louise.
Sally.
Just one point, Chair. If it is refused on that reason, if it should go to appeal, I'm just wondering what, obviously this is a technical reason for refusal. I'm just wondering about the evidence that we would be able to present some evidence?
I think from the council's perspective, it's got evidence from the evolution, etc. But whether I would need to go and get some further work to quantify this Jericho premium, I think possibly we would need to do some further work. Whether that is significant or sufficient to defend it, I couldn't tell until I got it, really. So I think that's the only way that we would be able to put a reasonable defence together. But as already been indicated in the debate and the discussion and the questions that have taken place, a lot of it is around judgment. And it will be a matter for the inspector to take the judgment on the various different opinions and views that have been put on the table when it comes to that appeal.
I was only just concerned that if we can't substantiate the reason for refusal, obviously we do put council at risk of an award of costs against us. I was just wondering if there was any merit in deferring to see if we can get that evidence before it's refused.
I do need to come back. There is a risk about the appeal, regardless of the evidence side of things, because there is a significant amount of evidence on the table from the applicant and the local authority, and I appreciate the third parties have got their opinion and their views on those matters. There is a fair bit of evidence for the inspector to consider. If he comes to the view at the end of that process that that was willfully refused without regard to it, I think that's a subjective judgment in itself. I think we can defend it. Whether we would win or not is another matter again. Whether we could defend the issue to do with costs, I think it will be hard, but I think we have a case to argue in front of an inspector because of the debates and what's been said in the evidence that have been heard tonight.
And just to point out to members, the fear of costs is not a material planning issue, but thank you, Sally, for raising it. Okay, we've had a proposal to refuse this application, which has been seconded for the reasons set out, which will be fully set out later on down the line with officers. So we have a defendable position. Can I see all those in favour of refusal, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Please don't clap, it'll only encourage us. Thank you. I know it's taken a couple of hours, but I think we needed that length of time to discuss it as fully as we did. We have more applications to come through. I'll give a 2-minute break whilst people... Yeah.
Going to come to me. Here we are, after 2 hours of detailed discussion. Democracy rules, people discussed it in, out, all the way around. The council has decided 6-0 to refuse the application from Cornerstone for the Jericho Boatyard. The major reasons that they refused the application were that they didn't believe the viability report. They thought the viability report didn't account for the Jericho premium, the premium of being in Jericho. That there was too little price put on the houses that are being sold. There was also disquiet about the social housing and the lack of that, and also the lack of community space in front of the church. So 3 major reasons: the Jericho premium not accounted for, the social housing maybe needs to be restored, and the community space. Now, if I were advising the Cornerstone, if they want to appeal this decision, it's very simple what they have to do. They have to get a totally independent new viability study of what the houses are worth and what the profit will be. And then they should use any money that coming from that to think about restoring social housing in the community centre, and think also perhaps about making the boatyard and the community centre, developing that a bit more than they've done now. But so there we have it. I mean, I was hoping we might get Oliver Holland on the phone and see what his reaction is, but I don't know if my technical whizzes can do that. Is it possible we can try and get Oliver Holland on the phone? Will that give me anything though? I will do. Let me give me a second. All right. Okay. Let's see if we can get Oliver Holland. Call him. See what his reaction is to this. No. So just to reiterate, the current application has been turned down. The mobile number you called is currently unavailable. Ah. Please try again later. This person's phone is switched off. Unfortunately, Oliver Holland has switched off his mobile phone, so we can't get him. And invites went out to lots of other people to react to this, but they chose not to appear. So just as we finish off this broadcast, let's explain. The application has been turned down. It's been turned down on essentially 3 grounds. A, the viability study probably needs to be redone to take account of the Jericho premium, the fact that living in Jericho costs a lot of money, houses cost a lot of money to buy in Jericho, that needs to be in there. Secondly, that social housing perhaps needs to go back into the scheme in some shape or form. So in addition to posh houses, some social houses. And thirdly, the community space and community benefits should maybe be a bit more. So it's a case of watch this empty space in the Jericho Boatyard. The saga continues. It's been going on for 30 years, 20 years, 17 years. Let's before we finish, let's remind ourselves of what currently is there and maybe what might be there. If we could see the aerial shots of the boatyard, and then there we are. That's what could have been, not there. Move on if you can. And here we are. This is what the boatyard looks like now. It's if we can run there, we can see it. It's rather sad and derelict. Maybe this gives us a chance to actually be much more imaginative and actually talk to college cruisers and do a complete Jericho canal side development, not just this tiny little development, but complete development, because Jericho needs it, Oxford needs it. After 20 years, there does need to be a decision on this, and I assume we'll be looking to developers to come back with a new and better and improved scheme for this jewel in the Jericho crown. Meanwhile, thank you for watching, those of you that have. We'll just leave so the committee has rejected the application, but that's not the end of the story, because the saga continues, believe me. All right, thank you very much, and good night, and run the end titles.
Yoo-hoo!